Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Mets Daily on the Fan Arch Network. John Saponaro here with you today and every day to talk about our New York Mets. Couple things before we get started. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel as we look to get closer and closer to 5,000 subscribers. And of course, a special shout out goes to our friends over at Kalshi for sponsoring the video for a limited time. Use the code FANARCHBASEBALL on the Kalshi app to get 10 when you trade 10. Well, we talked big about how the Mets needed to set the tone against the St. Louis Cardinals for just the purposes of trying to win a series, just the purposes of trying to get right in June, just the purposes of really kicking off this homestand in a way that was meaningful and impactful, and if for nothing else, starting to pay back teams that they've already lost series to. And if you go back to April, the St. Louis Cardinals in St. Louis take 2 of 3 from the New York Mets. And when the Mets are at the bottom, looking up at all these teams as they try to crawl back into the wild card race, maybe grab that final playoff spot. Of course, we're a ways off from that, but they have to start winning games against these teams. You cannot afford to drop series after series and have losing records against these teams. Not the way that the tiebreakers are set up now. We saw it already rear its ugly head last season at the end of the year when the Mets lose a virtual tiebreaker to the Cincinnati Reds, and that was the difference between that team making the playoffs or not. Now look, were the 2025 Mets going to go anywhere? Probably not. Were the 2025 Mets going to get bounced out of the playoffs as quickly as the Cincinnati Reds did by the Los Angeles Dodgers, who went on to win their second championship in a row? Probably, but you never know. The name of the game in baseball is to get into the playoffs nowadays and then let the chips fall where they may. And the Mets, by losing this game, and if they are to lose tonight, if they're to lose on the following day, it just sets this tone where the Mets have dropped another season series to a team that they may be competing for a playoff spot with, and that's just not where you want to find yourself. You know, it's easy to sit here and say, okay, it's just one loss. It's easy to sit here and say sometimes your pitcher doesn't have it, and the old cliche goes that momentum is only as good as the next day's starting pitcher. I understand all of that, and you know that I've been talking positive for the week plus that I've been doing this show. I put this virtual 1 month clock on the Mets before we start talking about selling. But when I did that, I said that that clock is not going to last the month if the Mets don't win more games than they lose. And look, again, it's just one game coming off of a 500 West Coast road trip. You're like, okay, vibes are a bit better. Team is playing better. But I think my frustration with this game is the fact that this looked like an April game. This looked like a game in the midst of the Mets' 12-game losing streak, or at the very least when the Mets lost, 7 of 8 following that losing streak, following some good vibes when they swept the Tigers and took 2 out of 3 from the New York Yankees. Then they go on the road and they drop a bunch of games. That's what this felt like again. It was a very ho-hum, 7-0 loss by the New York Mets. And honestly, because I told you guys from day one that I would never lie to you, I love watching baseball. And I love especially watching Mets baseball. But I will not be subjected to watch non-entertaining, non-fun baseball. And that's what this was. So I clicked this game off after the 5th inning because I just knew that this game was done. I knew that this game was over, and I wasn't going to put myself through watching a game where the Mets put together bat at bat after bat at bat, and they really had no chance in coming back. I understand Freddie Peralta wasn't good. I understand Freddie Peralta dug them deep, and they had to, try to press, and they had to try to, make every at bat count, and maybe you squeeze the handle a little bit harder. And yeah, I get it. I get how baseball works in that regard, but I am not going to sit through it because sports are supposed to be fun. Baseball's supposed to be entertaining. It's supposed to be an escape. And so I'm not going to sit here and be subjected to bad baseball. And quite frankly, you shouldn't either. And that's what this was. And again, it was a hearkening back to a time when the Mets were playing terrible, terrible baseball, looking badly while doing it, about as badly as you could. And if you don't pitch and you don't hit and you fall down 4-0 in the first couple innings, it's easy. It's easy to not believe. It's easy for a fan to look at this and go, 4 runs might as well be 40 runs, might as well be 400 runs. It doesn't matter because this team ain't coming back. And Dustin May, I was right about him, right? We talked about it on the show yesterday, how I thought he was going to give the Mets trouble because he throws a plus fastball and the Mets have a hard time squaring up the fastball. And Dustin May goes 6 innings, no runs, 4 hits, a walk, 4 strikeouts. I mean, that's about as tidy as you can be for a guy with an ERA that was approaching 5. But where I was right, and I'm not happy about being right that the Mets couldn't hit Dustin May, I was also wrong because I said Freddie Peralta. I said I like Freddie Peralta. I like where he's trending. I like him against the Cardinals. I like his chances or the chances the Mets have when he's on the mound, and I was dead wrong. Freddie Peralta at least goes the same 6 innings, only he gives up 6 hits, 6 runs, 2 walks, 5 strikeouts, I guess are fine, whatever, gives up a home run, but again, never gave the Mets a chance to win. And the Mets only got 5 hits total in this game. And if you didn't watch the game and I asked you to pick who the people were, the players were that got the Mets 5 hits, I bet you could guess. I bet you if I gave you the lineup, you could guess and you'd get at least 4 of those hits right because it's the same people who have been doing it all season long. Carson Benz gets 1, Juan Soto gets 1, AJ Ewing gets 2, and the returning Francisco Alvarez, who we'll talk about in a minute, gets 1 in his first at bat back. And that is it. That is the entirety of the offense for this game, start to finish. And again, we've seen this game too many times before in 2026. And like I said to you in the first week, and like I've broken recorded every show that we've done together since, the Mets cannot afford to continue to have these games. The Mets don't have any more losing streaks in them. The Mets don't have any games like this left. They don't have many of these where they can just look terrible, roll over, and die, and that's what they did. Starting pitching gave them no chance. Offense gave them no chance. Sure, Perez comes into the game later, gives up no runs. Who cares? Joey Gerber comes into the game, gives up a run. Who cares? And this who cares attitude, if the Mets aren't careful, that's what it's going to be. Not just from me, not just from all of you who watch this show. That's what it's going to be for the rest of the season. It is June 10th, and we are standing on the edge, looking down into a pit of who cares. And that is such a bad, bad place to be if you are a baseball team, regardless of the expectations. And when you start to add on what the Mets expectations were and what the Mets payroll is and all of that, the players that they have, the stars, yada, 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 it gets so much worse. Let's talk about, I guess, some of the good right now, which is Francisco Alvarez back in the lineup just 4 weeks after having surgery on a torn meniscus. And I know not everybody loves Francisco Alvarez after bursting on the scene, hitting 25 home runs as a rookie. He hasn't really lived up to that, both offensively, defensively, and he has been a guy who has been injury prone over the course of his career to this point. But one thing you have to say about Alvarez is that he is tough as nails. He continues to show that he will play hurt, that he will figure out ways to get back on the field. The guy's an absolute dog, and regardless of the numbers, and the numbers do have to be better, the offense has to be better. I get all that. I'm not going to make excuses for him. It's just really nice to see that this guy pushes through and is able to come back. And sure, he might have a healing factor similar to Wolverine or Deadpool that gets him back on the field, and that's a different story. But some guys' bodies just respond differently and respond quicker, and he seems to be a very quick healer, but he also puts in the work, and at that point, you have to respect it. We're going to talk a lot about injuries for the rest of this show because it's a big topic for the New York Mets. There's some good, there's some bad, there's some confusing. But you know what? In a world of Kodai Sengas, where everything needs to be perfect in order to get on the field, where everything needs to be great in order to get on the mound, and I've already spent some time on this show last week criticizing Kodai Senga for that. In a world of Kodai Sengas, be a Francisco Alvarez. Be a guy who is going to do everything he can to be on the field for his team because the team needs him. And again, I know that some of the numbers aren't great. I know that he hasn't lived up to the hype of being the number one catching prospect in baseball. I get all of that. But Francisco Alvarez is also still just 24 years old, and he's going to have positional value. He's going to be graded on a curve because he is a catcher. He does not need to be the best catcher in the sport. Now, I think inside he has the talent to be the best catcher in the sport, but a lot of guys have the inherent ability to be great and they never achieve it, and that's fine. But because he is a catcher and he does provide some offense and he does provide some power, he is a guy who's going to have a tremendous amount of value when you compare him to other players that came up around the same time, like Ronnie Mauricio or Mark Vientos and Brett Beatty, especially. Because he's a catcher, he does get graded on a curve. And the other side of this is, look, I know a lot of people love Luis Torrens. And I brought up Luis Torrens on a show last week where I said, make no mistake, Luis Torrens is a backup catcher. I know he was doing some great things for the Mets while Alvarez was gone, which is his job, by the way, as a backup catcher, is to step in and fill the role. I know that a lot of people sort of celebrate. A lot of Mets fans love when Alvarez goes down because they go, now we could finally get a look at Luis Torrens. And what happens with Luis Torrens over that time is, yeah, he's a player who can get hot and can have a lot of good at-bats in a row. And then he's a player who can go ice cold all at the same time. It's not a dig on Torrens. I think he's the best backup catcher in baseball. And we can talk about this maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day, at some point in the future. If you want to say, hey, Luis Torrens deserves more of a shared role with Francisco Alvarez, especially with the DH being available, that is a conversation I am willing to entertain for sure. But this idea that the Mets are better off, like some fans think, without Francisco Alvarez, that is a bridge too far. And you know what? In a way, it has nothing to do with Luis Torrens or Francisco Alvarez. In a more literal sense, it has everything to do with both of those guys. It's a really good catching tandem to have. But once you get past Alvarez and Torrens, you have to go to the likes of Hayden Senger. And Hayden Senger is simply not a major league hitter, full stop. And when you're a backup catcher, you are going to play 1 to 2 times a week. You cannot hide that position on the roster. I mean, look, Vidal Brujan is still here, right? When Francisco Lindor gets back, and we'll talk about him in the next segment, Vidal Brujan is going to be off this team. But also, when was the last time Vidal Brujan started a game? When was the last time Vidal Brujan took a meaningful at-bat? He is, in truth, the 26th man on the roster. He is here in case of emergency, break glass. Every once in a while, Carlos Mendoza, because that's what you have to do with a major league team, he'll get him a start, he'll get him some reps, and that's fine, whatever. Day game after a night game, 5-6 games in a row, all of this stuff. But when you have a backup catcher, you don't have that luxury to just hide them away. Oh, you sit on the back of the bench and you're never going to play, and we won't even look at you. Your number's never going to get called. Hayden Senger is going to play 1 to 2 games a week. And that's too many games because he cannot hit. I know he hit that home run. That's a great moment for him. I don't want to take anything away from him. First major league home run, all of that. That is wonderful. But he's not a good enough hitter to be in the major leagues in any way, shape, or form. And the Mets offense, as we all know, because we've been talking about it since I took over the show, Jake Brown was talking about it when he still did the show all the way back to the beginning of the season. The Mets offense isn't good enough to carry a player like Hayden Senger. So I'm happy Alvarez is back. I'm happy he did everything to get back as soon as he could. The timetable for his meniscus tear was 6 to 8 weeks, and he got back in 4. To put that in perspective, Jared Young also tore his meniscus. Jared Young came back within the 6 to 8 week timeline. Mike Tauchman tore his meniscus in spring training, and we still have not heard from Mike Tauchman. It seems like he is not recovering well. And by the way, we wish him well. Again, everybody's body is different. But Francisco Alvarez being physically able to recover this quickly and having the the guts, the determination to come back and be here for his team is something that should be celebrated. And I know a lot of Mets fans are going to say, I don't care. I just want them to win. I get that. And that is ultimately the most important thing. But you need players like this on your team. You need the gamers. And I get into a lot of debate and argument with old school baseball fans who want to tell me about certain ways that the game was played. Well, you can't say that you love how the game was played back in the day and then not celebrate the fact that Francisco Alvarez rubs some dirt on it after surgery and comes back to a catching position where he's got to be in the crouch and he's got to be doing all this stuff that puts extra pressure on his knee, and he's back in a month after knee surgery. So I think it needs to be celebrated. I think you need to tip your cap, and now we'll see. We'll see if he can provide a little bit of a spark as this Mets lineup continues, we hope, over the course of June to get healthy. Baseball season is here, and now you can trade every game on Kalshi. And as I always do, right before I hit that record button, I went over to the Kalshi app, I took a look, and I was really frustrated with the state of the Mets. And I said, what's an interesting one? What's a fun one? What's a departure that we can look at? Maybe player specific on the Kalshi app. And I saw that Carson Benj is trading at 9 cents a share to win Rookie of the Year. And that is very, very, very good value. MLB.com just released an updated list according to some executives and people around the league, where they think this this Rookie of the Year in the National League is going to go. And Carson Benj has inched his way into the top 5. Now, the favorite is still J.J. Weatherholt, who's playing against the Mets this week for the Cardinals. He is sitting at 42 cents a share. Carson Benj has a lot of work to do. Carson Benj is dealing with not only Weatherholt, but the likes of Connor Griffin and some other players who have really come on big this year. But Carson Benj has put together a streak of 40-plus games where he has been among the best hitters in baseball, not just rookies. So if he can continue that, he'll put himself firmly in the conversation. So now might be a good time for you to invest while the number is as low as 9 cents a share. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there is no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of that position. For a limited time, and you guys already know this, download the Kalshi app and use the code FANARCHBASEBALL to get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi, trade on anything. 18 and over only. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risks and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. And of course, now we've got to talk about Francisco Lindor. From one Francisco to the other, Mets got great news when Alvy returned to the lineup, and now, hopefully, Francisco Lindor's return to the lineup is on the horizon. Carlos Mendoza talked about it before the game. We saw Francisco Lindor kind of moving the last couple days. You saw him doing some tiny drills, and now he is either a full go for all baseball activities or he is about to be. And I know that's confusing language, and that's really coach speak and it's front office speak, and that can be frustrating. Basically what that means is Lindor is doing everything except really running the bases in a full sprint, which the Mets hope he's going to do on this homestand. And that's what Mendoza said, is that he is going to work during this homestand on all baseball activities. And if he can meet that threshold over the course of this homestand, which is another 5 games, I believe, well, then it looks like he is moving in the right direction to get into rehab games, and maybe is only 2.5 weeks away from returning. And the Mets can really, really use Francisco Lindor in this lineup. They could use his presence, they could use his leadership, and most importantly, they could use his bat and his glove. Francisco Lindor, for a long time, was the straw that stirred the drink for the New York Mets. Now, I understand he's no longer the best player on the team. That title belongs to Juan Soto, and it will for a very long time. The Mets have other really good players on the team, while they might not be playing at their best right now, namely a guy like Bo Bichette. And Bo Bichette, you got to give him credit, moved back to shortstop and has played fairly well. I don't think he's played great, but I think he's been okay enough to kind of hold that position down until Lindor returns. But there is no question that the Mets, the best version of the Mets in 2026, in 2025, in 2024, and you can go back to when he got here, the best version of the New York Mets includes Francisco Lindor playing shortstop. And it's not to mention that Bo Bichette was grading out exceedingly positive at third base. And for him to move off and go back to a position he is familiar with, that's fine. But for him to do that on the fly, tip your cap to him. But I'd like to get Bichette back at third base. And then you can also start to do some creative things with the lineup as well. Carson Bench, I think, until he proves otherwise, needs to stay in the leadoff spot. That's going to open up things for Francisco Lindor. Could you bat him second? That's probably where I would go. I would go Bench, Lindor, Soto, and then drop Bichette down to the 4 spot, and then drop Jared Young down. And then now all of a sudden you start to see how this lineup can lengthen. Now look, I get it. You're going to look at me. You're going to watch this video today and you're going to say, John, is it even going to matter? If Lindor comes back on June 25th, is it going to matter? Because this team might be dead and buried, and you might be absolutely right about that. But I don't know. On June 10th, we can only talk about the positives of a great baseball player returning to the Mets lineup. You know, I'm not going to sit here and say that it doesn't matter if Francisco Lindor returns on June 10th. Now, again, are the Mets buried deep? They are. Are the Mets burying themselves deeper every single day that they lose? Absolutely, especially when they lose like they did last night, because, you know, the losses all count the same, but they don't feel the same. They don't look the same. Losses like last night don't inspire hope. Losses like last night don't give you belief that this team, that there is a good team in there somewhere that can turn this around, that will fight. But the bottom line is, Francisco Lindor coming back would be a positive. No matter what. There's no other way to cut it. He's the second best player on the team. He's still one of the best shortstops in the league. He's still a guy who can do so much for you offensively, defensively, leadership, all across the board. And the Mets desperately need Francisco Lindor back. So it is nice to see that he is trending in that direction. And we'll see if that continues. And we'll see if in a week or not a week, 2 weeks or so, Francisco Lindor is back playing shortstop for the New York Mets. We'll end the show today on 2 other individuals who are currently injured for this team. And I'm unsure, honestly, guys, I'm fully unsure of what their status is. They're not shut down, they're rehabbing, then they're shut down, but then they're not really shut down. And they've done some stuff, but they're not really doing stuff, but we're unsure of how much stuff they can do. It is the curious case of Jorge Polanco and Kodai Senga. And by curious, I mean downright frustrating, especially Kodai Senga, because the Mets brass has been dealing with this for years from him. We talked a little bit about that, not only in the Alvarez segment, but we talked a little bit about it last time I brought up Senga last week. And Jorge Polanco is kind of getting into that territory very quickly, but he is an injury-prone player who they brought in, who they are trying to find a way to nurse along. And I think the Mets feel a little differently about Jorge Polanco as a hitter than they do about Kodai Senga as a pitcher, because Kodai Senga has been here for a long time. Kodai Senga has been a guy, like we talked about last week, where even if he's healthy, if everything isn't perfect, he cannot be a contributor. And that's why I brought him up during the Alvarez segment, where it's like, okay, you might not be 100%. You might have, I think Alvarez was playing with like 2 different hand injuries down the stretch last year when the Mets were fighting for their playoff lives. He had a broken bone. He was taped up. He was wearing all kinds of body armor to keep his hands healthy. And he was in the game every day. And, you know, did that limit him? Offensively, did it hinder him? I mean, at points it seemed like it didn't bother him at all because he was just fighting through it and getting hits and doing all this stuff. But did it hinder him? Maybe. But again, when your alternative is, hey, we're trying to make the playoffs here, let's give Hayden Senger some at-bats, I'd rather take Alvarez with one hand. So I appreciate the fact that he was out there grinding, trying to will this team, doing everything he could physically and otherwise to try to get this team where they needed to go. Whereas when you look at Kodai Senga, again, if the weather's not great, If his body doesn't feel 100%, if his mechanics are a little out of sync, that's it. Gotta shut it down. Can't pitch. Can't do anything. Impossible. And Howie Rose mentioned it on the broadcast. I listened to a chunk of this game for a moment when I had to run out, and he said something that was pretty scathing for a guy like Howie Rose to say. Again, Howie Rose covers the Mets, but he is a Mets fan for his entire life. And he basically said that the Mets are frustrated with Kodai Senga. And look, he's entitled to his opinion, of course, and Howie Rose is going to give it to you about as straight as anybody else, which is why the Mets broadcast on the radio and on TV is so good. But he said something that you don't usually hear from people who cover the team the way that Howie Rose does, in that he's a play-by-play guy. You might hear some of what Howie Rose said from beat reporters. You might hear that from Will Salmon, who's like, hey, look, I talk to my people and the Mets are frustrated. That's different. That's different kind of coverage. Howie Rose, I guess what I'm saying is Howie Rose doesn't have to say that. Howie Rose can just cover the game. He can just tell you about the balls and strikes and the outs and sprinkle in some anecdotes. He doesn't need to go out of his way to bring up Kodai Senga the way that he did. Now, sure, it's in the news, and baseball, especially on the radio, has downtime, and the two folks in the booth are going to banter a bit, but he didn't have to go there, and he didn't have to go there the way that he did. And the reason why I bring that up is because Howie Rose is all of us. Howie Rose is a fan. Howie Rose is in his last year covering the Mets on a daily basis, and he is watching one of the worst seasons unfold right before his very eyes. And a big part of that is players like Kodai Senga and where they were expected to be and what they have actually done for this team. Coming out of spring training, Kodai Senga looked electric. His stuff was playing in the high 90s. He had a couple really good starts to start the season, and then he fell off a cliff. And so Howie Rose is mad. Howie Rose is frustrated. That's why he brought it up. Howie Rose ain't pulling any punches because he's got nothing to lose. This is his last year regardless. Whether the Mets make a big comeback and make the playoffs and win the World Series, or the Mets go quietly into that good night and we have a year where in September and October, all of us Mets fans are looking back going, what happened? How did this happen? It doesn't matter. Howie Rose is going to be done. So I applaud him for saying it. It's just kind of like we talked about with Ron Darling and the state of play for the entire Mets team last week. These are about as scathing remarks as you can hear from somebody who does play-by-play or color commentary. And I think it's well-deserved because Kodai Senga has been frustrating. And Kodai Senga is just the kind of guy who, the Mets will be better off, I think, when he's off this team, regardless of his talent. It's an addition by subtraction situation. And then you have Jorge Polanco on the other side of it. And Jorge Polanco is a guy who was on rehab. We thought he was going to come back on last Friday, versus the San Diego Padres. And again, you hear this whisper, no, he's not. Mets want to hold him back. Mets want to get him more reps. And I talked about it on the show. I was like, well, you know what? That actually does make sense. He didn't play a ton in spring. He didn't play a ton to start the season once the injuries started to crop up. So the guy needs reps. The guy needs almost a full spring training. He needs at-bats. Let's have him looking good, feeling good. And I don't mean feeling good physically. I mean feeling good mentally, feeling good at the plate, because that's what we're going to need. We need a healthy hitting Jorge Polanco. We don't need a guy who's going to come here and feel it out for 2 weeks, because at that point, you might as well just give the at-bats to somebody else. And I thought that would be enough. I thought maybe another 3 games, another 5 games, another week, whatever, and he'd get back. And then all of a sudden you hear, no, it's because he's hurt and he's being shut down. He's being reevaluated. And as is the case with Kodai Senga, then you hear Carlos Mendoza talk about it yesterday. No, they're not shut down. Well, what do you mean? Their rehab is not going according to plan. No, they're not shut down. They're shut down, but they're not shut down. So Kodai Senga was supposed to pitch yesterday, but didn't. But then he threw in the bullpen, so he's fine. But he's supposed to pitch in a rehab game. The Mets need pitching. And I already told you, I don't think Kodai Senga is the way to go because I don't think he's very good. But the Mets need him. The Mets need someone like him to provide something, a la Francisco Alvarez. Alvarez is doing it. Kodai Senga can't do it. Can't pitch. I can throw, but I can't pitch. I just don't feel right. Okay. Jorge Polanco, I know the injuries that he's dealing with are fairly debilitating. It's not to say that Senga's aren't. I'm not in their body, so I don't know. And by the way, he was dealing with like some ulnar tenderness, I guess, in his arm, which is real for a pitcher, of course. But with Jorge Polanco, then you hear the Mets saying like, oh, well, we think we're going to have to give him some reps at DH almost exclusively and get him running better and all this. Yeah, I talked about it on the show last week. Of course, that's what you should be doing. You don't need Jorge Polanco to play first base right now. I told all you guys that that's where the Mets should go. He should be getting the lion's share of the reps at DH. And every once in a while, when Juan Soto needs to DH because he's got to rest his calf or rest his wrist as best he can, okay, well then maybe Jorge Polanco just doesn't play that day. Right? You're not gonna force feed it. If Jorge Polanco can't really play the field, you got Jared Young in there. Maybe unfortunately you got to put Mark Vientos out there, whatever the case may be, and you just roll with it. But this idea that like they were trying to build him back, and I don't need a guy to be out there not healthy. I don't need a guy to come out there and be a part of this team when he's not ready to contribute. So I'm not saying like Jorge Polanco, just suck it up and deal with the injuries and come out here and be a part of this Mets team. I'm not saying that, but it's like not only are these players, in the case of Kodai Senga, mismanaging and foobarring this situation, but I feel like the Mets are too. Because from 100 miles away, 1,000 miles away, hell, I live 3,000 miles away from Citi Field, I could tell you that the best course of action, and I'm not a medical professional, for Jorge Polanco to be on the field and be a contributor for the Mets sooner rather than later is to have him hit and hit only. So this thought process that, well, we're trying to get him reps at first base. Why? Why? You don't need Jorge Polanco at first base. You need Jorge Polanco, the hitter, in the lineup. So it's just another confounding thing in the list of confounding things that the Mets have done and the Mets have been a part of all season long. And it's upsetting. And I know why all of you are frustrated, and I'm frustrated right there with you. And we'll see. We'll see if things turn around today as the Mets have another game to play. We talked about it in the series preview. It's a game that I like for the New York Mets going up against a guy in Andre Palante who is fine. He's just fine. But the Mets did make an announcement, and it was in an effort to, I guess, give an extra day of rest to not only Nolan McLean, but also to Christian Scott, because we thought Christian Scott was going to pitch today. We previewed it that Christian Scott was going to pitch today and that TBD was going tomorrow in the finale. Well, now Austin Warren is going to open for the Mets today. Christian Scott gets pushed to tomorrow, which means Nolan McLean is going to get pushed back to the Braves series. And if we go back to his show last week, you'll remember that I said the Mets didn't need a starter, absolutely need one until like the 13th of June. But there was a spot on, you guessed it, June 10th, where if they wanted to give extra rest, they could use a spot starter there instead and give extra rest to some of their younger pitchers and also Sean Manaea. And I thought that's where the Mets would go then. And it seems like after initially setting up their rotation one way, the Mets have decided to go that route after all. I don't know if it's going to work. It'll probably be David Peterson in a bulk role. I didn't hear anything either way with regards to that before I recorded this. Austin Warren will open. I would guess it's David Peterson coming in bulk. And then Christian Scott will get the finale against the Cardinals. And that'll push Nolan McLean and Sean Manaea into the Braves series coming up. That's going to do it for this episode of Mets Daily here on Fan Arch Network. I'm John Saponaro. And remember, if you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and subscribe as we are sitting at 4,200 and some odd subscribers. And we appreciate each and every single one of you. But we're trying to get closer and closer to 5,000. We'd love for you to be a part of it. Until tomorrow, let's go